glad to have them with us. Well, sometimes I am struck by how easily I have the habit of compartmentalizing my life. I always realize it in hindsight when I see how I have been able to place some things over here and other things over there. For instance, years ago when I was a hospice chaplain, it was a regular day at the office, so to speak, for me to be with someone who was drawing their final breath. Family would be gathered around the bedside, usually crying, often bewildered and grieving. And I would pray with them and cry with them and hug them and talk with them. But a few hours later, I would find myself at home, enjoying dinner, maybe watching a movie or a baseball game on TV, laughing, talking with Ellen, as if nothing extraordinary had happened that day. As if I had taken the experience of being with a dying person and a grieving family, and sometimes that might happen a couple of times a day or more, and I had poured all of that into a Ziploc bag and sealed it up and placed it in the fridge and closed the door. Because I could do that, I wondered then, and I wonder sometimes now, what kind of a person am I? How can a sane person who cares about other people, who has empathy and compassion, as I believe that I do, simply flip the switch off, seal that bag up, and store it away, and behave as if it had no effect on me? I remember in those days telling myself a lot, well, that I was a professional, just doing my job. And while I felt genuine empathy and sadness for my patients and their families, if I ever were to let those things get to me, if I could not turn off my feelings, it would tear me up, and I could not do my work. So I resolved to not let those things get to me. I compartmentalized, or at least I tried to. And as it turns out, not very successfully. And that experience taught me an important lesson that was much larger than how to handle the emotional part of being a hospice chaplain. It taught me that compartmentalizing anything is really an illusion. That if we were to imagine ourselves as a refrigerator, as I very strangely do sometimes, holding and keeping safe and fresh all of those different parts of us, in an attempt to separate the pieces of our lives that do not go well together, I learned that we can try to compartmentalize our lives all that we want, but sooner or later, we run out of Ziploc bags and enough space in our fridge. Mental health professionals say that when we compartmentalize, it's a defense mechanism. We separate conflicting feelings and thoughts so that they won't cause us anxiety, or so we think. Truth is, the anxiety is still very much there beneath the surface. So to stay emotionally healthy, we have no choice, really, but to work through those parts of our life we had hoped we could manage by keeping them stored away in the dark and in the cold. Now, I didn't appreciate this until after I saw a therapist for many years who helped me understand why I felt very sad most of the time. Why, on crystal clear blue sky days, everything literally looked dark to me. It was precisely because I had become a master at compartmentalizing, and it was slowly killing me inside. So my own experience taught me the importance of taking stock of my whole life, of finding some kind of wholeness to it, some constant to it. And by that, I mean recognizing that the good, but also the bad, the mistakes and the victories, the pain we've suffered and the pain we've inflicted, the worries that keep us up at night, as well as our happiest hopes and dreams, all of that accumulation, all of those things are not somehow separate, disembodied pieces. They make up all of who we are. And the journey we're all on in this world is to honestly acknowledge that all those pieces exist. And to survive that reality, we must travel in the direction of having compassion for ourselves and loving ourselves in spite of everything. And know and accept that we are loved no matter what. But, I can still compartmentalize. I'm great at it. Man, we all do that in one way or another. One of the most common ways it's done is when it comes to our faith. Things like religion, church, what we think and believe about God. It's very normal for our spirituality to be put over here, and we visit it every now and then, maybe once a week or so on a Sunday morning. It's not that it's unimportant to us. You wouldn't be here this morning if it was unimportant. But socially, culturally, we've often bought into this idea that what goes on as far as our faith, our spirituality, really has little impact on the rest of our lives. Like, does it have an impact on how we earn our living, or how we manage our finances, or the decisions we make when we shop for groceries? I mean, how many of us pray for God's guidance when we're in the fresh produce section? I don't ask God if I should get the navel oranges or the little miniature cuties. It never crosses my mind that kind of decision is something God even cares about. And the truth is, while I think it's fine if you do pray for God's guidance at the grocery store, or when you're balancing your bank account, or as you are out walking your dog, I'm more interested in the bigger picture of how we frame our whole lives, knowing and accepting that God does care about our whole lives, and not just the time that we spend at church or think spiritual thoughts or in prayer. In other words, with all of who we are, with the whole of us, the parts of us that are really great, and the parts of us we're not so proud of. Do we really know and accept that God still knows and accepts and loves us wholly? Do we know and accept that God cannot be compartmentalized out of any part of our lives? That God is right here with us and surrounding us and embracing us in everything? This is the week of the year on the Christian calendar when we see that truth really come into focus. Now, on the one hand, we witness the worst of what humans are capable of. We see in the story of the final days of Jesus' life the betrayal at the hands of his best friends, one of them, Judas, literally selling him out. We see religious leaders, the priests, representatives of God, act with corruption and malice and treachery. They have murder on their minds. We see a government official, Pontius Pilate, giving in to a mob when the right and the noble thing to do, the honorable Roman thing to do, would be a fair trial and real justice. Instead, the convenient and expedient thing Pilate does is to wash his hands of the matter as if he doesn't have a choice. Maybe he justifies it by telling himself, oh, well, this is a shame, but it's just another troublemaker. I guess he deserves it. And we see the organized brutality of government-sanctioned torture and execution. And not just execution, but a way of terrorizing people with public shame and degradation and suffering and a slow death. It's as if a committee of sociopaths got together to create the most cruel contraption ever devised to kill someone slowly and painfully. So they designed a cross. And we see as Jesus hangs on that cross, helpless and bleeding, suffocating from the fluid building up in his lungs, we see people who work in the service of God making fun of a dying man whose only crime was to speak truth to their power. And on that Friday, at least, power in its worst, most malignant form wins. Jesus dies. So we see this week the worst of human nature. And before he died, the witnesses say Jesus quoted the Psalms. God, why have you abandoned me? Where are you? So in his voice we hear the cry that we make when all hope has been lost. If you've ever doubted that Jesus was 100% fully human, just remember that moment of despair and be assured that he was one of us. But this week we also see the best of human nature. We can lose sight of that sometimes. We hear shouts of joy and see people waving palms and laying down their own cloaks because they're filled with so much hope. His follower Mary anoints the feet of Jesus with priceless perfume. Siren of Cyrene carries the cross of Jesus, bearing his burden for a while. The women gather at the cross. Joseph of Arimathea, risking his reputation and maybe his own life, steps forward to provide a tomb, his very own place. He'll be buried someday. So we also see this week excitement, joy, nobility, sacrificial love, humble service, courage, and devotion. We see the bad and the good, the whole of what we are capable of, the entire spectrum of human nature. This is a tale that refuses to be compartmentalized. I may have told this story before, but it's worth repeating, I think. On the night of March 6, 1987, a cross-channel sea ferry sank in the Belgian port of Zeebrugge, 90 seconds after leaving harbor. There were 500 people on board. The assistant bosun on duty had failed to close the bow doors. Now, before they launched, the first officer had not been present. To check and make sure that the doors were closed, the bosun had seen that the doors were open, but had chosen not to close them because it wasn't his job. That meant as the ship launched into the water gushed into those open doors, and the ship capsized with the loss of nearly 200 lives. Later inquiries revealed culpability and complacency at every level of the ship's management. So many human mistakes and folly and avoidance of responsibility contributed to the disaster, and yet there was an assistant bank manager named Andrew Parker who was a passenger on the ferry that night. And he did an extraordinary thing. He was in another part of the ferry, and as the ship was flooding with water, he saw two large metal barriers, and these barriers were designed to form a seal between the bow doors and the rest of the ship. So the doors that were open and allowing water in and the rest of the ship. And in that gap between these barriers, he saw the rush of water coming into the ship from the open bow. The barriers were closing fast with water pushing them shut, and it was obvious to Andrew that anyone caught inside between the bow, the open bow, and these barrier doors, they would go down with the ship and drown. Behind him were dozens of people, and so he held onto one of these big heavy doors with his fists and the other with his ankles. He made his own body into a human bridge by stretching between the two doors, keeping them open. 20 terrified people, including his own wife and daughter, climbed over him and to safety. Now, how Andrew Parker found the courage and the strength, and how he was still rescued after offering his own life for so many others, no one could say. But there was no doubt that in that disaster, the world could see both ends of the spectrum of human nature. The depths of failure and the heights of greatness. The whole of what humans can be. Now, when we all walk through these doors this morning, I wonder which compartment of ourselves, of yourself, you believe that you brought with you today. Were you bringing the broken, hurting, angry, worried, and anxious part of you? The part you'd rather keep out of public view? Or were you bringing the hope-filled, courageous, forgiving, peaceful, loving part of you? Whatever part you may believe you brought, the truth is, none of us can really be compartmentalized like that. That's not to say we don't have our good days and bad days, good moments and not so good moments. Of course we do. But whether we realize it or not, whether we accept it or not, we carry all of ourselves around with us all of the time. The parts we're not so proud of are right here in the same piece of baggage, or if you want, in the same refrigerator, intermingled with all the parts that we most love about ourselves. This week, we revisit the story of what happens when our mixed up lives, all of who we are, the full spectrum of human nature, when all of that makes contact with the wholeness of God. The story we hear this week of Jesus on a cross is the story of God stretched out between the pain of human weakness and mistakes and evil and suffering and the limitless possibilities of human goodness and peace and courage and nobility and grace and love. It's the story of God in us and with us and surrounding us, all of who we are. And saying to each of us, I am holding these doors open for you. All of who I am is for all of who you are, because I love you. Amen.